They've lied to you about Moses. For thousands of years, the most powerful truth in the Bible was sealed not in a book, but in stone, and almost no one knows what it really was. This wasn't about commandments, it wasn't about religion. What Moses brought down from that mountain was not just law. It was a vibrational blueprint, a divine code, quantum technology encoded in stone that carried the actual frequency of Yahweh himself, and they buried it. Religious systems turned it into rules, institutions turned Moses into a mascot, and the real covenant, the one that could awaken your spiritual DNA and reconnect you directly to the source, silenced. I was a pastor for 30 years, and I'm telling you now what I've discovered changes everything. If you're watching this, it's because you're not like the rest. You're part of the remnant, those Yahweh marked to remember. This channel isn't for everyone, but if your spirit has ever felt like there's more, you just found the key. Subscribe, not for content, but because you're ready. Welcome to Yeshua, this is your awakening. The world has known the 5 books of Moses as the foundation of divine law, revered by Jews, Christians, and scholars alike. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. These texts are held as sacred pillars authored by the prophet who walked with Yahweh. But buried beneath centuries of tradition lies the whisper of something more. A 6th revelation, an unspoken volume that never made its way into the scrolls, but because it was lost, but because it was hidden by design. This was not merely another scroll or stone slab, it was the blueprint of humanity's divine origin, the encrypted covenant that Moses received atop Sinai, concealed from the world by both fear and power. When Moses ascended the mountain, he was gone for 40 days, and the people below grew restless, doubting his return. But what could have taken so long if he was only given 10 simple laws? What dialogue with the divine would need weeks of silence and fire unless the message was far more intricate than we've been told? The truth is, Moses received more than 10 commandments. He was entrusted with encoded knowledge, frequencies etched into crystalline stone, patterns that resonated beyond language and time. The masses could not comprehend what he saw, so only a fraction was brought down. The rest remained hidden, not because it lacked importance, but because its wisdom threatened the very power structures built around controlling faith. Throughout the Hebrew tradition, there are hints of texts removed, revelations silenced, and scrolls never canonized. The Book of Enoch is just one example, a document charged with celestial knowledge and divine mechanics that it was declared apocryphal, buried by those who could not allow ordinary believers to possess such power. If Enoch could be erased from the official record, then what of Moses? What if the true Book of Moses, the one that detailed humanity's cosmic alignment with Yahweh, was deliberately kept from us, not destroyed but veiled? Moses' tablets were not just slabs of rock inscribed with moral suggestions, they were divine archives. The choice of stone was no accident. Stone carries frequency, permanence, and memory. Yahweh chose it because the laws given were more than text. They were energy signatures, vibrational patterns meant to harmonize the human soul with the Creator's design. What was written in stone was not metaphorical, it was literal, divine encoding, a kind of sacred quantum technology beyond the comprehension of a people just emerging from slavery. The message was never about control. It was esoteric, meant for the awakening of the inner self, but because such empowerment would disrupt religious hierarchies and economic systems rooted in dependence, the truth was filtered through ritual and legalism. The priesthood, Levites, and later institutionalized clergy erected walls around the knowledge, selectively revealing only fragments that would maintain order and submission. The rest was locked away, embedded in cryptic verse, or dismissed as mysticism. Even within the Torah, careful readers can find anomalies and mysteries. Why do some divine commands seem incomplete or coded? Why are there references to events and knowledge never fully explained? Why is the presence of Yahweh described in sounds and lights, thunder, smoke, and vibration? These are not literary flourishes. They are remnants of a deeper narrative, clues pointing to a missing frequency in the symphony of sacred text. Verses speak of hidden things, of secret names, of knowledge too powerful for the unprepared. These are the fingerprints of the concealed covenant. This book of Moses, this sealed revelation, is not myth. It is not a product of modern speculation or spiritual fiction. It is memory, ancestral memory, encoded in our spiritual DNA, passed down from the mountaintop to the marrow of our bones. It has been suppressed for millennia, not by accident, but through deliberate design. By replacing revelation with religion, truth was buried under the weight of temples and traditions. Today's believers wander through a landscape of diluted doctrine and inherited amnesia. They have been taught to fear mystery, to avoid the inner temple where Yahweh still speaks. The average soul has been cut off from the frequency of the covenant because the key was hidden, not in stone, but within. We are not waiting for a new prophet to descend a mountain. We are waiting to remember. The stone tablets were only the external echo of a truth that Yahweh encoded in every human being. This hidden book of Moses has never truly been lost. It pulses beneath the surface of Scripture, beneath the noise of dogma, beneath the distractions of modern faith. It calls not from a shelf or a scroll, but from within the spirit of every seeker. It is not found by learning, but by remembering the resonance, the voice, the covenant sealed not only in stone, but in soul. That is the book waiting to be opened, the one buried in silence and now ready to speak again. From the earliest days of organized theology, Yahweh has been framed as a celestial monarch, a god on a throne with emotions, commands, and wrath that mimic human authority. This portrayal, while comforting to some, is a reduction. It confines the divine to a human mold, shrinking eternal mystery into a patriarchal image. But Yahweh is not a bearded skyfather watching from above. Yahweh is not a deity invented by religion, but the pulse that precedes all things, the architect of vibration, the matrix of frequency, the source field from which all creation emerges. To confine that to flesh and personality is to miss the entire nature of what Moses encountered. Yahweh did not begin in Genesis. Genesis is simply the point where human awareness was permitted to access part of the story. Before the first word was spoken into being, Yahweh was not as a character, but as the very breath of existence. Beyond dimensionality, beyond time, beyond the language of Scripture itself, Yahweh existed as the blueprint of all consciousness. The Genesis account is not the beginning of Yahweh, it is the beginning of our awareness of form. Creation is the result of resonance, and Yahweh is that original resonance, the vibrational source that divided light from darkness and time from timelessness. This is not theology, this is frequency science written in spiritual form. Yahweh is not a being, Yahweh is being itself. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was vibration. The true nature of Yahweh is not anthropomorphic, but quantum. Moses did not hear words as we understand them. He encountered a frequency that spoke directly to his cellular structure. The divine voice that came from the burning bush was not mere speech, it was an energetic field, encoded in fire and light, translated by Moses' consciousness into meaning. The fire did not consume the bush because it was not physical combustion, it was resonance, divine coherence. The name Yahweh itself is not just a label, it is a frequency pattern. The tetragrammaton YHWH is a vibrational key. Ancient mystics knew this. Each letter corresponds to sacred breath patterns, to tonal structures that unlock different states of awareness. It is not meant to be pronounced in common language, not because it is forbidden, but because human language cannot contain its totality. YHWH is a sonic map, an ancient code pointing to the vibrational essence of creation. Those who understood it could enter altered states, aligning their inner frequency with the eternal field of YHWH. YHWH does not belong to one religion, one text, or one lineage. The essence of YHWH is source energy as the architect of light, predates all human institutions. Before Abraham walked, before Adam named the animals, the essence of divine intelligence pulsed through the void, forming galaxies, spinning atoms, harmonizing all that is. The energy Moses encountered was not local or tribal, it was cosmic, ancestral, infinite. And yet that same force animates every soul born into the world, for we are each fractals of the original field. The idea that YHWH belongs to a group, or favors one race, or sits in judgment like a tribal chieftain is a corruption born of power, seeking minds. If one studies the pattern of creation, the mathematics of nature, the language of DNA, the geometry of galaxies, one finds YHWH fingerprint not in stories, but in structure. Sacred geometry is not artistic, it is divine language. Quantum fields are not theoretical, they are the clothes YHWH wears. The same principles that govern particle behavior, harmonic resonance, and biological design are the laws Moses tried to explain through symbols and story, but those stories were later flattened by religious literalism. The true language of YHWH is waveform, not word form. Human time is irrelevant to this understanding. YHWH speaks through eternality, through rhythms, through cycles. The messages encrypted in stone tablets were not bound to an era. They are keys that transcend time. Because they are based on universal law, this is why ancient truths never fade, and why spiritual awakening always feels like remembering, not learning, because the essence of YHWH bypasses clock time and enters the soul through timeless recognition. But organized religion could not contain such a YHWH, a God who dwells in light, who speaks through energy, who calls each human to direct connection, threatens every temple that profits from intermediaries. So YHWH was rebranded not as a field, but as a father, not as presence, but as judge. Scriptures were edited to reflect human agendas. The mystery was domesticated, the infinite was tamed and weaponized. Fear replaced frequency, law replaced love, and the source field that Moses encountered was turned into a character in a story, rather than the source of the story itself. Now, in this time of unveiling, the veil must be lifted. YHWH does not belong to history. YHWH is the current flowing beneath every breath. This chapter is not about belief, it is about resonance. The original voice in the fire still speaks, but now it speaks through quantum fields, solar flares, and human intuition. To return to YHWH is not to bow before an altar, but to tune one's soul to the sacred frequency that vibrates through all life. Was not created in Genesis. Genesis was created by YHWH, and so were you. The word covenant is often reduced to a religious contract, a divine agreement sealed by obedience and ritual. But this interpretation is far too shallow for what Moses received. The covenant given on Sinai was not a set of legal conditions, it was a spiritual operating system, a divine code embedded not in law, but in frequency. It was not about rules, it was about resonance. YHWH wasn't handing down commandments for behavioral control. YHWH was gifting humanity with a vibrational blueprint, a sacred alignment device encoded in stone, designed to recalibrate the soul to its original divine setting. Each so-called commandment was not a command in the human sense, it was a frequency key. When spoken aloud, when inscribed in stone, when meditated upon in silence, these principles didn't just instruct, they activated. They were like tuning forks for the spirit, each one vibrating at a specific energetic level, meant to harmonize with human DNA and consciousness. To obey them was never about conformity, it was about coming into resonance with divine order. To live them was to align oneself with the fabric of creation. And yet, what if there were more than 10? The text tells us of 10 commandments, but what if that number, though sacred in itself, was a simplification for the sake of a people not yet ready for the fullness of the code? Hidden within the esoteric traditions are whispers of 12 energetic principles, 12 frequencies that mirror the structure of creation itself, 12 tribes, 12 gates, 12 tones, 12 dimensions of human awareness. 2 of those frequencies may have been veiled, reserved for the awakened, not omitted, but hidden in plain sight, accessible only through the heart, not through the eyes. The tablets were more than engraved stone, they were sacred instruments of balance, divine mathematics, sacred geometry, cosmic ratios, all encoded into the shapes, spaces, and inscriptions. These were not just instructions, they were blueprints, the same ratios used to build the ark, the temple, the very human body. Each shape held a vibration, and each vibration carried information. The covenant was a multidimensional schematic, a guide to restore not just moral behavior, but energetic wholeness of mind, body, and soul. It was never about morality alone. Morality can be taught by any system. What Moses carried down the mountain was not a list of do's and don'ts. It was a manual for human consciousness. It was a divine interface, enabling human beings to reconnect with Source. Yahweh wasn't interested in petty behavior modification. Yahweh sought to awaken dormant potential. The covenant was meant to recalibrate human beings, to walk in divine coherence, to become conduits of light and channels of divine intelligence. The tablets themselves weren't ordinary stone, they held crystalline properties, resonant minerals capable of encoding and transmitting energy. Like spiritual flash drives, they captured and sustained the frequency of Yahweh's message across time. The commandment to preserve them in the Ark of the Covenant wasn't about storage, it was about maintaining energetic integrity. The Ark was a resonance chamber, designed to hold and amplify the vibrational signature of the covenant. Those who approached it unprepared were not struck down by wrath, they were overloaded by divine voltage. Moses didn't write the covenant, he received it. It was not a literary task. It was a transmission, a download from divine consciousness into human form. What came through him was pure spiritual data, translated into a medium the people could perceive, but the translation could never capture the full force of the transmission. That's why even Moses had to veil his face. The resonance of what he carried exceeded what the unawakened could bear. And this covenant wasn't for Israel alone, it was never about tribal exclusivity. It was a universal template, encoded into the soul of every human being. Yahweh spoke through Moses to reach all of creation. The tablets were symbols of a cosmic truth, that divine order is accessible to all who seek it, regardless of bloodline, creed, or nation. The covenant was for every soul born of light, born of breath, born of Yahweh, but in time this living code was buried beneath ritual, layered in liturgy, reduced to laws, ceremonies, and memorized chants. The energetic power of the covenant was lost in the translation of spirit to structure. What once vibrated now sat in silence. The divine interface became a museum relic, admired but no longer activated. Legalism replaced living light, and the blueprint, once so alive, became a list of restrictions. Yet the code is not gone. It is still accessible not through rote memorization but through alignment. To activate the covenant is not to recite it, but to become it, to walk in harmony with the frequency of love, justice, unity, and light, to live as if your body were the temple, your soul the ark, and your heart the tablet. This is not about belief, it is about resonance. The covenant does not ask for obedience, it invites transformation. And those who feel the stirring within, who remember the frequency once sealed in stone, will find that the true covenant has always lived within them, waiting to be reawakened. To the modern mind, stone may seem primitive, cold, lifeless, mute. It conjures images of cavemen and crude tools of a time before ink and parchment, before circuits and screens, but such assumptions are born of arrogance, not insight. What we call primitive, the ancients called powerful. Stone was not chosen by Moses because he lacked alternatives, it was chosen by Yahweh because of what it could hold. The tablets of the covenant were not archaic slabs, they were vessels of divine frequency, designed to retain the resonance of sacred law across the ages. They were not crude, they were intentional, chosen for their capacity to carry the wave of eternity. Crystalline stone, particularly those with high silica content, possesses the innate ability to store and transmit vibrational data. This is not mysticism, it is physics. Quartz, for instance, is still used in modern electronics because of its ability to regulate frequency and memory. Now imagine stone not as dead matter, but as the first divine hard drive, embedded with spiritual code by the creator of all frequencies. The tablets Moses carried were frequency-stabilized archives, literal energy storage devices inscribed not just with text, but with the living resonance of universal law. We are not speaking metaphorically. The phrase written in stone has always been taken to mean permanence, immutability, but that understanding is only the surface. What was written in stone was not just instruction, it was vibration. Every carved line, every divine symbol was an energetic imprint, a waveform encoded into matter. These weren't laws in the legal sense, they were resonance maps, and the stone wasn't a passive surface, it was the transmitter. The fact that there were two tablets is no coincidence. Divine communication is never accidental. The duality reflects cosmic balance, masculine and feminine energy, left and right brain, spirit and matter, light and shadow. Just as our bodies are dual-chambered beings designed to balance opposing forces, so too were the tablets. They represented a harmonic pair, two poles through which divine current could flow. One tablet mirrored heaven, the other mirrored earth. Together they formed the interface of the covenant. And how were they inscribed? Scripture tells us they were written by the finger of God, but to envision a literal finger-itching letters is to diminish the mystery. Yahweh is not flesh, Yahweh is frequency, the finger of God is fire, light, and energy. The inscription was not chisel and hammer, it was a kind of laser carving, a divine engraving that cut through stone at the atomic level, burning truth into matter without friction or heat. It was energetic transfer, not manual labor. The tablets didn't simply contain a message, they became the message. Stone survives where paper decays. Stone holds memory beyond the rise and fall of civilizations. The ancients built their temples, altars, and monoliths from stone, not out of ignorance, but out of reverence. To encode the covenant into stone was to ensure its transmission across time, unbroken, uncorrupted. Even when hidden, buried, or stolen, the resonance would remain. But the true genius of the tablets was not in the visible inscriptions. It was in the silence beneath the surface, like a computer chip with visible circuitry hiding vast unseen data. The power of the tablets was not in the words, it was in the vibration. The tablets spoke through silence, emitting frequencies that could only be decoded by a heart in alignment. Those with open perception could feel the covenant, not just read it. This is why Moses' face glowed after contact, not from radiation but from resonance. He had absorbed the frequency and become a transmitter himself. Scripture offers strange clues, descriptions of the tablets as glowing, as heavy beyond reason, as unable to be touched by the unworthy. These are not poetic exaggerations, they are remnants of real phenomena. The tablets weren't just sacred, they were dangerous to the unprepared. Like standing too close to a nuclear core without protection, their energy overwhelmed those not yet attuned. The Ark of the Covenant was not a fancy box, it was a frequency stabilizer, a shielding device designed to contain the vibrational signature without leaking into the uninitiated environment. It was sacred containment, not symbolism but technology. For too long, these truths have been dismissed as myth, legend, or religious metaphor, but we must shed the dogma and reclaim the power. The tablets of stone were not storybook relics, they were our evidence of divine intelligence encoded in physical form. They are the intersection of heaven and matter, the convergence point of light and law. And though the original tablets may be lost to history, their resonance is not. The covenant is not only sealed in stone, it is sealed in the soul. It continues to call, to vibrate, to awaken. But only those who see beyond the veil will understand that the story was never about stone, it was about what the stone could hold. There was a time when divine connection was direct, immediated, and vibrationally alive. The early covenant, as Moses received it, was never meant to be filtered through hierarchy or clothed in ceremony. It was designed to awaken, not to control. But soon after the tablets were delivered, the machinery of suppression began to turn. What began as revelation was quickly molded into religion. The power of Yahweh, which once pulsed in the hands of a prophet standing in firelight, was gradually recast into doctrine, dogma, and fear. The frequency that Moses brought down the mountain was buried beneath stone altars, built not to honor Yahweh, but to consolidate authority. Early religious institutions realized quickly that access to the divine was power, and where there is power there is control. They began crafting theology not to liberate but to centralize. Sacred knowledge was compartmentalized, interpretation became the privilege of a few. The mass of believers were told that they could not understand Yahweh's will without guidance, that the divine was too distant, too complex, too holy. Thus began the long era of mediation where priests, rabbis, bishops, and scholars stood between humanity and the source, each one layering filters upon the original signal. In this process, Yahweh's nature was weaponized. Once a source field of balance and resonance, Yahweh was rebranded as a tribal deity, a warrior god, a being whose favor could be won or lost. The divine became territorial, partisan, even vengeful, an image crafted not from the vibration of Sinai, but from the fears and ambitions of men. Wars were justified in his name. Empires were blessed under his supposed command. The sacred fire that once enlightened was now used to burn those who dissented. Even Moses' own legacy was not spared. The mystic who climbed into cloud and thunder, who returned glowing with the essence of divine contact, was stripped of his esoteric knowledge. His message was narrowed into moralism, his experiences flattened into literal history. The teachings he may have preserved in hidden codes or oral transmission were lost or, worse, erased. Dogma replaced dialogue. The mystery was simplified for the sake of control. Over centuries, the very texts that carried echoes of truth were edited, translated, and reframed to fit institutional needs. Words were changed, meanings were softened, key terms were reinterpreted. Where once the text may have pointed to energetic law, now it spoke of obedience. Where it once invoked divine presence, it now instructed religious duty. Layers of translation filtered out the frequency. The vibrational power of the covenant, its tone, its resonance, its activation potential, was lost in the noise of human language. Those who tried to keep the ancient memory alive, mystics, prophets, sages, were often cast out or condemned. They were called heretics, blasphemers, enemies of orthodoxy. They spoke of light, frequency, alignment, and personal communion with the divine, and for this they were silenced. The fire that once ignited Moses was now considered dangerous, a threat to the control system built in Yahweh's name. A new role emerged in religion, the clerical intermediary. Priests and leaders positioned themselves as the sole authorized channels of divine will. They became the interpreters, the gatekeepers, the ones who could bless or curse, permit or forbid. The ancient idea that Yahweh could be accessed from within, without temple or altar, was deemed dangerous and subversive. The true temple, your body, your vibration, your consciousness, was ignored. Instead, believers were taught to look outward, not inward. Sacred knowledge, especially that which dealt with vibration, sound, geometry, and energy, was pushed aside. The math of the covenant, the sacred ratios encoded in the universe, were labeled pagan or occult. Symbols once used to unlock higher states were demonized. Anything that could lead to personal empowerment was recast as a threat. The vibrational science embedded in ancient languages, in divine names and sacred architecture, all of it was buried. Political empires found in religion a powerful tool. The Roman Empire fused spiritual control with governmental authority, blending Caesar and Christ into a single hierarchy. European monarchies claimed divine right, backed by theologians who painted Yahweh as a cosmic king who anointed rulers. Colonial powers spread a version of Yahweh that came with crosses, swords, and chains. Control of the divine narrative meant control of hearts and minds, and so a great forgetting set in, a spiritual amnesia passed down through generations. People no longer knew how to feel the divine, only how to obey it. They no longer heard the frequency, only the sermon. The covenant, once a living resonance, became a recitation. The sacred interface that Moses activated became a relic. The path inward was blocked by centuries of fear, but now, in this time of great unveiling, the remembering begins. The frequency is rising, the suppressed truths are surfacing, people are awakening not through books or buildings, but through vibration, intuition, and divine encounter. The code sealed in stone is vibrating once again, not from Sinai, but from within. This is not rebellion, it is return. The institutions may resist, but the soul knows what it was designed to remember. To awaken is not to abandon faith, it is to reclaim it. It is to strip away the layers of distortion and come back to the source of the covenant, not the version filtered through empires, but the raw resonance first given in light, in fire, in vibration. Yahweh has never been far. Yahweh was simply hidden behind the veil of power. That veil is now tearing, and when it falls completely, every soul will know that divine was never outside of them, It was sealed inside, waiting to be remembered. Moses was never meant to be a monument. He was not intended to be a distant icon carved in reverence and placed beyond reach. He was a transmitter, not a deity, a messenger, not a mediator. His greatness did not stem from his personal holiness, but from his spiritual receptivity, from his ability to become empty enough to receive something no one else could hold. The mountain he climbed was not just physical, it was dimensional. He stepped into frequency, into light, into divine data flow, and emerged carrying what no scroll or priest could invent, the raw transmission of Yahweh's resonance, the living covenant encoded in energy and stone. To understand Moses is to understand alignment. He stood in the perfect place between heaven and earth, between the noise of the camp and the silence of the cloud. He became a resonance point, a harmonic bridge where human consciousness could meet divine intelligence. He was not a filter, he was a receiver. He didn't own the message, he simply allowed it to move through him without distortion. The power was never in the man, but in what moved through him. That is what made him glow, not holiness as we understand it, but vibrational elevation. He became luminous because his cells had been exposed to the raw current of divine frequency. His body became a transmitter, a radiant beacon of decoded light. We must stop worshiping Moses and start understanding him. He was not the message, he was the delivery system. Yahweh did not exalt Moses to become an idol. Yahweh used Moses because he was open, prepared, willing to dissolve his ego and serve as a vessel. To elevate Moses above others is to misunderstand his mission. His life teaches us not to follow blindly but to receive boldly. Every human being is equipped with the same capacity for divine download, but religion has hidden this truth beneath layers of hierarchy and fear. The burning bush was not just a moment, it was a metaphor for what happens when human awareness intersects divine frequency. The fire did not consume the bush, just as the energy of Yahweh did not destroy Moses. It transformed him. It tuned him to a higher frequency, calibrated his inner circuitry to carry what others could not. Moses was the original spiritual technology, not a man with magic, but a being aligned enough to interface with Source. That was always the intention, that every soul would eventually do the same. Moses was a prototype, not an exception. The tablets were not supposed to stay in an ark, and the knowledge was not meant to be held by one. But as the message came down from the mountain, it collided with fear. The people weren't ready, they demanded distance. They asked Moses to stand between them and Yahweh, to become the intermediary they feared they could never be. That moment changed history. What was meant to be shared was sealed. What was meant to flow was frozen. Over time, Moses was mythologized. The system elevated him beyond recognition, making him untouchable so others would not aspire to his role. This was not Yahweh's design, it was institutional convenience. When the messenger becomes the idol, the message is forgotten. When the prophet is pedestalized, the people forget they too are prophets in waiting. The same institutions that distorted Yahweh's nature distorted Moses' mission. Instead of activating the many, they canonized the one. But what if Moses had more to share? What if the deeper teachings, the instructions for personal alignment, the mechanics of divine reception were buried? He came down from the mountain with something more than laws. He came with a system of activation, a way to remember what was sealed inside each of us. That knowledge may not have made it into the texts, but it lingers in the ether, in the oral fragments, in the mystical whispers of forgotten tribes. Moses didn't invent this wisdom, he reawakened it. He accessed what was already there, encoded in the earth, in the stars, in the human spirit. He tuned into the collective memory of creation, and now the time has come for that memory to rise again. We are not here to idolize Moses, we are here to become like him, to stand between dimensions, to clear the inner static, to receive. This isn't about religion, it's about resonance. It's not about history, it's about frequency. Moses was the first of many. You are not meant to admire him from afar. You are meant to step into the same fire, to glow with the same light, to hear the same voice. The role of the messenger did not end on Mount Nebo. It multiplies now in every soul that dares to remember who they truly are. You are not a follower, you are a receiver, and the code is waiting. The covenant was never lost. It was never broken, never destroyed, never erased by time or tampered scrolls. What Yahweh gave Moses on the mountain was not just a moment in history, it was an eternal blueprint embedded not in buildings or borders, but in biology. The true covenant was written not only in stone, but in the human form, encrypted in light, buried deep within the divine architecture of our DNA. You carry it now not as memory but as potential, not as belief but as resonance. This is not spiritual poetry, it is spiritual technology. You are the living scroll. Human DNA is not random, it is not merely a string of biological data. It is a cosmic code, a living archive of every divine encounter, every sacred instruction, every frequency Moses downloaded in the cloud of fire. Your DNA is Yahweh's silent library, vibrating with truths forgotten by history, but not erased from existence. Every strand is a spiral staircase, a Jacob's ladder rising within you, waiting to be climbed. You are not separate from the covenant. You are the continuation of it. But to access this covenant requires activation. You cannot remember what you have not tuned into. The divine code is not unlocked by intellect alone, it responds to alignment. This is why spiritual practices exist, not for superstition but for synchronization. Meditation quiets the noise. Fasting clears the static. Prayer, true prayer, not begging but resonating, elevates your field. Harmonic sound recalibrates the cellular vibration. These are not rituals, they are instruments, and when played together, they awaken the dormant covenant within. Because frequency is the key, not faith alone, but frequency. Yahweh does not dwell in temples made by hands, but in the vibration that forms all things. To align with that vibration is to log into the living covenant. To harmonize with it is to access divine instruction directly. No priest required, no temple visit. The true Mount Sinai is within. It is a sacred elevation of the mind and spirit, a place of meeting that only opens when your frequency rises to match the divine field. This is the end of intermediaries. No more needing others to interpret the voice of Yahweh for you. The covenant was not given to Moses so that he alone could access it. It was given to model the process. Each of us is meant to ascend, to listen, to receive. Yahweh is not distant, not cloaked in mystery beyond reach. Yahweh is frequency, presence, breath. And your body is the tabernacle. You are not waiting on permission to hear from the divine. You are waiting on yourself to remember how. And when you do, sovereignty returns. The covenant reactivates not as law, but as identity. You are not subject to a kingdom, you are part of it. Spiritual sovereignty means reclaiming your authority to walk in alignment with divine will, without mediation or manipulation. This is not rebellion, it is restoration. You were never meant to outsource your spiritual connection. The power of the covenant was always meant to flow through you, not around you. The covenant is not a contract, it is not a checklist, it is a divine operating system. It governs not only action, but thought, not only ritual, but vibration. It teaches us how to move through the world in resonance with truth, justice, balance, and love. When active, it transforms the way you see, speak, decide, and create. It is the Yahweh code flowing through your words and deeds, shaping reality from the inside out. And once activated, you do not just carry the covenant, you become it. You are the living tablet. Your actions inscribe divine law in the hearts of others. Your presence transmits alignment. The covenant no longer sits in an ark, it walks in you. You are the voice in the bush. You are the resonance on the mountain. You are the flame that does not consume. And this is the great awakening, not of nations, but of souls. The next revelation will not be shouted from a mountaintop, it will erupt from within. The next Moses is not a man, it is a movement. Every believer who dares to remember, to vibrate higher, to walk in direct connection with Yahweh, becomes the continuation of that covenant. The story is not over, it is unfolding in you. The stone may have shattered, the tablets may have been hidden, but the covenant never left. It waited in the silence, in the stillness, in the sacred center of your being. And now, if you are ready, it will rise not as text, but as truth, not as history, but as living fire. Amen.